Well, welcome everyone to the Women in Systems Thinking Dialogue Series for 2025. I can't believe we're already halfway through the year. This is our second dialogue this year, and we are thrilled to have two phenomenally um, brilliant economists on deck for today. Jayati Ghosh and Amanda Janoo, who will be in dialogue with one another. Looks like there's somebody in the waiting room. And so we're going to get into the meat of today's dialogue, but I want to take just a moment to offer up that we invite everyone to please be kind. Especially if you've never been here before, we really ask that everyone be respectful and have general agreement around the kind of language that we're using and the way in which we're communicating with one another. You're welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat. And I also want to just situate this conversation. Myself, Carolina, and Audinette represent the system of systems thinkers. And we're very interested in breaking down silos in the field of systems thinking and inviting more collaboration and collective action among systems thinkers across a range of disciplines. So that's how we came together. And then this dialogue series that we started in 2020, oh, I don't know, at least 3 years ago, has featured some of the most profoundly important voices of women in the systems thinking field and beyond, some in dialogue and some solo. And you can find all of those conversations recorded on our YouTube channel and also posted on our new website at sost.life. We may be one behind there in posting, but anyway, you can find most of the dialogues there. So I'd like to take just a moment to invite you into a brief grounding exercise, and I'm going to steal something from another conversation I was part of earlier today, which is I invite you to just take a moment and think about something that you're grateful for. Amidst the many things that are scary happening in the world right now, it's easy to get absorbed by all that we can't control or all that we don't want to see. And so I just invite you to take a moment to hold on to an idea of something that makes you really happy and that you're grateful for. And just consider that for a few seconds as we arrive in the space. And I will just name, in the spirit of full disclosure, that I am grateful to be caring for my mother today. I happened to be with her, and she needed some help with some appointments. And she mentioned this after this dialogue was scheduled. So I am literally driving her from one appointment to the next today, in between my own appointments. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm caregiving today while hosting this conversation. So it's not lost on me that I'm both grateful to be able to care for her and also multitasking a little bit. So I appreciate your flexibility and patience, and I'm grateful to Carolina, who's here to support me in a stationary way. So with that being said, I want to just suggest that if you haven't read the bios of these amazing speakers, Amanda Janoo and Jayati Ghosh, we're not going to take time to recite those biographies to you today, but you can find them on the Eventbrite invitation, and they will also be posted on our website as soon as we can get this video up. But they are both doing, in our estimation, some of the most important work in the world. And we're really excited for them to step into dialogue together. And I'll just kick it off. I don't think they're going to have any issues being in dialogue continuously for the next 30 or so minutes. But I will just pose a question to both of them as a way to kick this off about how you have considered systems thinking in your work, either an embedded way or an embodied way. What are the ways in which you've considered systems thinking in your work, and how might that have come into view for you, either explicitly or implicitly? So with that, I'd like to invite Jayati to start.
Well, thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be with all of you. And I'm really delighted to be having this conversation with Amanda and also, I hope, later with all of you. Yes, so systems thinking, I think, without realizing it, I was probably wanting to do it or engaged in it well before I realized that that is what it is. So, just in terms of a very quick background, I started my post-school work, my undergraduate college work in sociology because I wanted to understand society. I wanted to understand the things that make it take and all of those things. And as I was studying it, I kept thinking, well, there's this, I'm missing a lot of the real things that are making all of this happen, the material things. And so I switched to economics actually. And then I did a PhD in economics. And then over time, I realized, my goodness, you really cannot understand the economy until you understand society and politics and culture. And so increasingly, I sort of realized that the word interdisciplinary is probably wrong, that we have to be transdisciplinary, that all of us have to be really thinking within the insights of all these different things. And we have to recognize that these are systems that interact, are continuously in flux, and one little thing somewhere can have very significant effects somewhere else. And I guess all that became much more graphically apparent to me when I started working with natural scientists, which I hadn't worked with before. I mean, you know, in academics, we tend to be very, very, I mean, not exactly tribal, but we do stick around with our own groups a lot. But I was involved in several of these exercises. Particularly, I was part of something that's called the Transformational Economics Commission of the Club of Rome. And that contained scientists, natural scientists, of course, Johann Rockstrom and people. It contained modelers, it contained philosophers, it had political scientists, it had, all kinds of different people. And I think that really brought home to me how much richer it is when you start thinking in terms of a systems approach. And especially, the things that concern many of us, I'm sure a lot of us here are part of the broader issue of looking at patriarchal systems. You really can't get at them until you're attacking them every which way. At least that's been my experience. What do you think, Amanda?
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize that actually you started out in sociology,
Yeah.
Jayati. It's very cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so maybe similarly, before knew the maybe terminology of systems thinking, it was very much, I've always sort of viewed the world as all of these overlapping Venn diagrams with these various social, environmental, political, spiritual, cultural challenges, and felt that somewhere towards the center sat the economy. So the way that we produce and provide for one another, and really felt that if you could transform that system, it would ripple out and really benefit so many other aspects of life. And speaking to the patriarchy, I think my original interest in economics came from feminist theory. So when I learned about a lot of the assumptions in neoclassical economics around our human nature as being inherently like individualistic, rational, competitive, selfish, as a woman, I didn't relate to those. And especially with my lived experience being from a bicultural household in a rural area, that's not the kind of motivations that I saw motivating on a lot of the ways that we were producing and providing for one another. And so that really led me to be interested not only in economics, but also more heterodox approaches to economics, whether that was like feminist or institutional economics or ecological economics, and ended up studying with Hajun Chang in Cambridge. And he's very interested in industrial policy. And at the time, the one thing I knew was that neoliberalism was the worst, and this whole hands-off approach to the economy was a terrible idea. And so I ended up working in industrial policy for quite a while in the international development arena. And doing that, I think I'd been already quite exposed to a lot of postmodernism. So I did not feel like I had a right to come in and say how things should be, but could help to facilitate processes of co-creation of these strategies. And the most important thing was understanding what the actual goals were of the country and whether that was around equity or resilience or peace that really influenced which types of economic activities you wanted to protect and promote and why. And so that led me actually one of the big, maybe first important influences was a Club of Rome event that was for
Mhm.
younger people and economists to reimagine the economy. And that's where I met Kate Rayworth and Catherine Trebek. And meeting, prior to that, I'd only ever been exposed to male, actually, economists and mentors. And so that was really huge around the ways that they were really working to try to redefine progress and development, and having, these incredibly inspiring women in the field. And so I ended up volunteering for We All, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and eventually coming and working as their economics and policy lead. And so much of it is around recognizing and embodying a lot of systems thinking and approaches around how we transform this economic system to work in service of people and planet's well-being.
This is really lovely to hear you say all that. And Harjun, in fact, is an old friend of mine. He just gave me his book, the latest one, Edible Economics.
Ooh.
It's fantastic. It is such an example of systems approach because he's taking 17 different kinds of food and he's using that as an anchor to tell you about all kinds of other things. And I loved it. I'm going to tell my undergrad class to read it for sure. But it does make me realize, the conversation we're having, the fact that you could name several people, the fact that I can also think of many people like Kate Rayworth and others who are friends, this is really recent. I mean, I've been around for quite a long time. I've been an economist. Horrifyingly, I've been studying economics for half a century now, actually. And it was very, very rare. We would have been such outliers. In fact, we were huge outliers. So there's progress, right? I mean, we were talking just like I was asking, okay, what can you be grateful for? Here's a thing to be grateful for, that we really do have more and more people who are not just open to systems thinking, but recognizing that that's the only way, really, to understand anything. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've often thought about that as I feel so grateful because I started to study economics leading up and during the financial crisis. And I remember right after the financial crisis thinking, well, this is it. This is the moment where all of our standard economic theory and approaches are going to transform. And I'm too young. I'm missing the boat. But like everything, it takes a little while for it to percolate and sort of settle in. And so yeah, witnessing such a growing interest in not only heterodox economics, but more systems thinking perspectives, especially after COVID, I feel like there was a massive acceleration. And I've often described the well-being economy movement as being part of this broader paradigm, like feminine paradigm shift of moving from very linear, mechanistic, siloed, and hierarchical ways of organizing and structuring the world to more integrated, systemic, holistic, compassionate forms. And so we're in that, and I think there is a lot of that, but I'm also witnessing a huge backlash to this right now as well. I think in the form of not only the like sort of crisis of masculinity, yeah, but the really violent ways that small groups of men are trying to reform and take control of political and economic systems in line with a very small group of like men's interests. And so, yeah, I'm curious about your sense of this moment in time, Jayati.
For me, I have to say it's not a big shock because
Mm-hmm.
I think the economics discipline, we are talking about the fact that there are so many more people who are open, but they are really, in a sense, outside the mainstream discipline. The
Mm-hmm.
mainstream discipline has been really aggressively, I would say, not just macho, but, rigid and hierarchical and deterministic and punitive to people who question. And it's tough. It's tough. I tell my students that, look, I think what you're doing is great. I love what I do. I think this is the way to do economics. But be prepared for a world where you will not get the right jobs. You will not get the right publications. You will not go up the ladder as quickly as the people who are willing to do very standard, wrongly assumed, but very mathematical, say, models that are part of the mainstream. So, in a sense, power, which is in a way what you're really talking about, right? Power has always been very strong in the mainstream of the economics discipline. And not surprisingly, because it's too important, right? It's too critical in it. And now what we're seeing is an overturning of that set of power with another kind of power, but equally macho, aggressive, etc., etc., etc. And so, in a way, it's not a complete surprise, I have to say. It is a shock, but hey, I come from India. We've been here. We've had this for the last 11 years. We know. I kept warning my colleagues, you don't know what's coming. It's going to be really bad. And they kept thinking, no, it can't be that bad. And now they know it can be. So I guess we have to reckon with power. And part of the problem of being systems thinkers is that, because we're seeing the whole all the time and we're seeing how all the interlinkages work, et cetera, we don't miss, but we are not adequately prepared for the fact that one particular element, power, can dominate over everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I do one hopeful bit actually. So last week I was part of a group that is helping to reform the International Baccalaureate Economics curriculum. And because I feel like if we can get them at like 16, 17 to at least explore some more pluralist economic ways of understanding the issues or priorities or maybe goals of our time, that could be so transformative. Because rereading the syllabus, I had so much PTSD from Econ 101, like the way they treat micro, macro.
Yeah.
It's so
No.
ideological.
I'm delighted you're part of that project. It's based in the Netherlands, right? They've been in touch. Yes. So I've also agreed to review some of the sections from textbooks to just say, is this okay or not? But you're right. So much of the things that are assumed about, let's say in micro, the rational behavior of the individual, possessive individualism, the fact that, you only choose between work for money and leisure, that therefore unpaid care work wouldn't exist at all. From that micro to the macro, where so many crazy assumptions are made, which they don't reveal to you, because if they did, then people would know that, hey, this doesn't tell us about our real economy. So I think the fact that we can now approach many more younger people, and also that, let's face it, the technology allows us to do that, right? You can come across people, you can hear lectures on YouTube, you can get engaged in online discussions in a way that you really couldn't before.
Absolutely. And I do think, did you see this Financial Times article the other day that was also referencing a study that found specifically around economic topics? Women are actually much more trusted experts and influencers around issues, whether that's around like financial policy or AI or any of this, because it's already assumed that in these like male-dominated spheres that we have to have a certain level of expertise, and our framing often moves beyond the zero-sum game, kind of like competitive attitudes or assumptions of the goals of the system. And so, yeah, it's been wonderful for me to see the amplification at like these sort of initiatives of like more women in the space. And I'm seeing more and more women also sort of entering in, and more jobs that aren't just like, if you want to engage in the economy, previously it was all just doing econometric analysis for some company or agency or whatnot. And now there is much more, I think, interest and demand for systems thinking perspectives and more holistic analysis of the economy as it relates to our policy culture, et cetera. And so, yeah, we're 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I guess.
And a few steps sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the role of especially people like you, it's so important, because I think educating the general public is possibly even more important than just educating young economics graduates and so on. Because it's too important. Economics is too important, too crucial to be left to economists, right? And we know the kinds of mindset and the wrong assumptions and the wrong models that guide so much of that thinking. So it's really important for everybody else, for every citizen, every person, to be knowing and being able to call the bluff and say, that's not it, that's wrong. So I think, that part to me is possibly the most important aspect. That's why, for example, the stuff Arjun does, I think is great, that you can bring it down to the ordinary level and get everyone to understand how a lot of this stuff just sucks, actually.
Absolutely. That was actually one of the major reasons that I wanted to study with Ha-Joon as well, because he did communicate to a public audience. And as you were saying, he never ended up getting tenure at Cambridge as a result of it, because he wasn't, he was trying to communicate with a different population or a wider audience. And I hold that so much. Like my passion in life is to just demystify the economy, because it's, at least here, it's presented as the most important thing and the area of life that's too complicated for you to understand, let alone to have an opinion on. And we're, especially in this moment of like rising economic populism, I think people having a sense of that, like, we are the economy. It is, one aspect of our societies within a larger ecosystem, and we have the capacity to change it, is really the type of message that we want to be getting out there, so people can feel not only empowered to engage in those discussions, but to take direct action as well to reform those systems. Because the underlying assumption that money makes money, right? That everything needs to be profit oriented so that you can reinvest that into an expansion of production, that everything is oriented towards economic growth. It's like it's become just common sense, even though it doesn't make any sense. The idea that everybody looking out for themselves is going to make everybody better off. Like any child would recognize the flaw in that logic, but yet somehow it's become the conventional wisdom. And I think once you illuminate it, people can see the flaws in that way of organizing systems.
So, here is where I find a lot of right-wing populism fascinating because,
Mm,
they've got that point. They have the critique and they have the questions. It's just that then they're converting that into, the most awful kind of blame your neighbor, blame the migrant, blame the Muslim, blame, whatever. Uh, so as to sort of deviate, but they've got the problem right. And I
mhm,
think that's what progressives we have to keep reiterating. And I think we make a huge mistake when we fall into the trap of hanging out with the liberals who are basically trying to say, no, everything was just fine until, let's say, I mean, to take an example, until Mr. Trump came and blew up the economy, everything was fine. We
mhm,
really have to be out there saying, I'm sorry, everything was not fine. It was a deeply unequal, unjust, fragile, wrong kind of economy. Yeah. And that there is a better way of doing it. What the right is telling you is not the better way of doing it. But we have to be constantly saying that we're not with the ones who are saying, no, no, it was all just perfect before.
mhm. Absolutely. I mean, Carl Polanyi's The Great Transformation was probably the book that like
Mhm.
changed my life. And so I
Mhm.
think about so often about us being in the double movement right now. And so whereas in the interwar period that manifested in the form of like fascism and communism, in this, at least in the US in the last election, we were offered fascism or continued neoliberalism, like corporate globalization. And like we're not offered another vision for our political and economic systems. And so I think, how do we penetrate sort of the mainstream discourse? Because, yeah, frustrations with corporate globalization are legitimate, and it's the
Yeah.
standard strategy to scapegoat immigrants and the most vulnerable in society for that. We know this. And so, how do we really tell that different story? And every culture obviously is probably different in the way that this is manifesting. But here in the US, I think the left has the logic right, but the feelings wrong. It's like there's a lot of shaming and blaming, and that the feeling that that invokes for people, as opposed to it being one that is empowering or making
Are you
people
talking
feel
about the
good.
left or the center? I
Left.
get really the left
Yeah,
as well.
I would
Ah,
say so, more so. I mean, and again, there's a wide variety, but I think there is quite a bit
mhm.
of a sort of like moral high horse superiority that,
Yeah, yeah.
to sort of, yeah, and fracturing.
Yeah, so that if you voted for Trump, you're a deplorable, that
Yes.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, in a way, for me, it's actually the worst kind of deja vu because
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not, we had all this in India over the past 11 years. It's just that I think in the US, you're seeing it in a very accelerated form. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
these guys watch each other and they learn from each other, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Modi, Erdogan, Sisi, I mean, they're all watching each other and saying, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do this to the universities. Oh, I can do that with the federal forces, etc. So we've had pretty much everything that is going on in the US right now over a slightly longer time period. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's similar, but in a very different cultural context.
Mm.
And to me, that's fascinating because it again points to something you said at the very beginning. There's a Venn diagram with all these, but that there's a core of this economic thing, which is affecting all of these other, if you like, all the other nodes that are spreading out. Yeah.
Mm. It's so hard though, because I feel like my experience, in the well-being economy movement, so many people come in because of the beyond GDP, right? Like,
Mhm.
so they recognize that our
Yeah.
indicator of progress is wrong and maybe come in from an environmental starting point or, an equity starting point, and then start to think, okay, so our indicators of progress are wrong, our economic system is the problem. And then as they go along, they're like, oh, wait, but actually maybe it's our democracies and our governance systems that are the issue. And then they start looking into governance and democracy. And then they realize, like, oh, well, actually, maybe this is a fundamental values issue. Yeah, and a cultural issue that is like underpinning it all. And so, like, the further you go, like, the deeper. And so, understanding, yeah, where are those levers of change and like what is ours to do within
Yes.
this system, and also trusting. I think one of the challenge I've noticed in sort of systems movements is the tension between a desire to be able to illustrate your impact and the need to accept that the ways that things ripple out in this system you can't know. And so
Mhm.
trusting in some ways that this you can't always assess your individual impact or the ways that this will ultimately yeah, move in the years or
Yes. Yes. And also
generations to
because
come.
change is so complex. And
Mm-hmm.
attribution of change, people have all these theories of change and so on. I'm very distrustful of a lot of these because it is complex. It is really, and that's the nature of systems. That's why when you have a systems approach, one of the difficulties then becomes, okay, but then where do I intervene? If
Mm-hmm.
everything is related to everything else, and do we just all go home to bed and wait for the end, or do we actually do something? In which case, which one, where? And I think it's that issue where I waver myself. I waver from, if you like, the thin end of the wedge approach. That
Mm-hmm.
here is something that begins small, but it will grow and it will have an impact. And I won't say absolutist, but the putting some things down, saying this you have to have. Like for me, I would say universal, affordable healthcare for every person is like
Mm-hmm.
minimum basic,
Mm-hmm.
But you should be putting it out there as the basic thing that everybody must get, say,
Mm-hmm.
as one of the. So, it's a complex thing, and that's part of coming from an approach that recognizes systems. Because then you say, okay, wait a minute. I mean, then Kate would tell you, wait, yeah, but you have to keep it within the boundaries, and then here's the donut, so you're stepping out of it already, and etc. So, once you have a systems approach, it's inevitably complex, and that can be a problem because that's harder to communicate.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
right wing is it's so simple, bash all the migrants, kill all the whoever's, I mean, it's very straightforward. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's not a complex thing at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recently read On Tyranny, by Timothy Schneider. It's like his principle
Mhm,
for
mhm.
like based on his research of the rise of
Yeah.
fascism. And that was the way he described tyranny or fascism. It's
Mhm.
like simple answers to complex problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
like the desire for that, right? And how to not fall into that, but also to meet people really where they are for wanting to
Yes.
have concrete avenues for meaningful contribution or change and acknowledge that yeah, it's not simple. There's a lot of different
Yeah.
multifaceted dimensions of this. Hmm.
And I guess related to that is also then the issue about which are the things you compromise on because you think
Mm,
it's more important to get this one through than something else. So you compromise on, and I'm on lots of all these international boards and things. So I'm always doing that. I'm always compromising on something because I really want this other thing in. And then afterwards
hmm
I go home and think, should I have really done that? Should I have just stuck it out and fought with everybody and not signed that document because I didn't agree with, point 17? It's a tough one.
That's really tough. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's part of like a broader question too of like how to live in integrity in this world, of
Yeah.
also acknowledging that we don't know everything, right? But we also have, there's important to maintain those clear boundaries for ourselves to feel like we're acting in integrity. I mean, one question I have this is more personal, but when you were talking about the sort of attribution of change, one of the things I've been noticing a lot attention in the field is, and amongst many women too, is feeling like a lot of their ideas are being taken, or they're not like doing well enough at promoting themselves and centering themselves within this arena in order to get sort of the attribution or acknowledgement that is necessary to play the game, to be of influence. And I don't know, I don't love that, I guess, right? Like I like the Taoist philosophy that the best leaders are the ones you don't even know exist, because you feel like you've done it yourself. And I also acknowledge that that is a really real phenomena, like within our current system, sort of that self-promotion and centering can be quite important. And so I don't know, I'm just curious how you've navigated that in your career.
Oh, you've touched something so. I've been thinking about it just in the last few days because I have some friends who are incredibly successful, I would say even politically, like Mariana Mazzucato. She
Mm-hmm.
is really effective, and when she says something, people listen
Mm-hmm.
and it works. And a lot of that has to do with the ability to project herself.
Mm-hmm.
So I see it. I see it as a weapon. It's just, it's also something that, I don't know. I mean, some of us are just not, how shall I put it, culturally or emotionally or psychologically ready for that whole thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's important how you wield it, because I think she actually recognizes this as a political weapon. She sees this as a war out there, and she's going to use this as a weapon. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that she's promoting herself, if you see what I mean, but she's
Mm-hmm.
using herself to promote the idea. Now, that's really, that I think I respect.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of other people who just promote themselves, which is the kind that puts people off, right? But it's not, how can I, it's not something that everyone can do.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a whole different personality, I believe, and a different, I don't know, capacity to do that. These are different skills. These are not skills everyone has.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the skill, if you don't have also that conviction that you're doing it, not, what I mean, that you're doing it as a weapon in the war, but then it can very easily descend into a kind of narcissistic self-publicity. I mean, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And since so much of popular culture today is really that, it's the whole sort of Kardashian thing or reality TV thing. So, there's that thin line really that.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
This
I
is such
really
an important.
appreciate you. Oh,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Carrie.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just gonna say I really appreciate that, Jayati. Like my comms team has been trying to get me to engage in social media for like years, and I know that that's where so much of the discussion is happening, but there's something for me that I've had a feels cringy, like to do it. But I think that framing of, utilizing it as a mechanism to spread ideas as opposed to promote yourself, right? Like what is that outlet, I think is really important. And yeah, and again, there's seemingly people listen to women more, surprisingly. Yeah, when we have that position and the opportunity. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Sorry, Carrie. I cut you off.
Oh, no, no, not at all. No, I just was going to say, first of all, we're kind of at that moment where we're going to turn to a breakout, but also this is one of the questions we wanted to explore with you. And also, um, yeah, I mean, we could have a whole conversation about that topic alone. And as you know, this series was started explicitly to elevate the voices of women, the luminary women that we've had the privilege of hosting, in order to try to lift them up above the noise. And we know that we're not even very good at that, by the way, just saying, it takes a lot of effort. But it's interesting because that phenomenon exists transdisciplinarily, right? It's not unique to the systems thinking field that women's voices are underrepresented. It's consistent across fields and across disciplines. And to your point, Amanda, is there a possibility that we're actually having more impact than we realize when we're not investing energy and trying to, promote ourselves or use these skills that we don't necessarily have refined? So it's a very, very interesting question. And I wish we had more time, but now we're going to turn to an opportunity for our participants to get in dialogue with one another. And we have a couple of amazing questions from Amanda and Jayati that we invite you to either consider singularly or together in the same conversation. And if you'll bear with me for 1 second, I will just pull those up. Okay, so the prompts for your consideration, we're gonna send you off into a 12-minute breakout. I think that's right, or something like that. And we're gonna invite you to consider the following from Jayati and Amanda. The first one is, which economic activities or behaviors do you see as positively contributing to our social and ecological well-being? So what are the positive behaviors that we are participating in on the daily, or just at all in our economy, that lead to social and ecological well-being? Then the second prompt is, what is your experience of working in coalitions with people you don't completely agree with? Right? So collaborative leadership, collective leadership, and particularly coalitions and partnerships where there's tension and friction. So you are welcome to explore those questions individually or mash them up. But we will send you off into pairs. And then when you come back, we'd love for you to scribe as much as you're willing to scribe in the chat, because we won't obviously have time to cover everything that you'll discover in your conversations. But scribe everything in the chat that you'd like to share, and then we will have an opportunity for some reflections and some questions and answers when you get back. So any questions before we send you off into your breakout rooms? And does that sound right to you both, Jayati and Amanda? Okay. So then we'll see you when, Carolina?
In 15 minutes. Enjoy the discussion. See you very soon.
Thank you. From folks. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a great conversation. Is everyone back, Carolina?
I think so. Yes. I see
Okay.
everyone.
Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to Roxanne, who joined us during the breakout. So Roxanne, just to bring you up to speed a little bit, we heard a wonderful dialogue between Amanda and Jayati, which you'll be able to watch on a recording later. But in the meantime, we've just welcomed everyone back from a short pairing to explore a couple of questions that Jayati and Amanda had for them. And they're very rich questions. So we're going to go ahead and dive into a little bit of reflection and questions and answers now. But just as a reminder, I want to invite everyone to scribe away in the chat. Let's fill it up so that we have lots to consider even after this conversation today. And if you have something that you'd like to share aloud, either a reflection or a question, I invite you to raise your hand and we can call on you. And if there are no questions or reflections, oh, there we go, Joseph.
Something in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you. In regards to the first question, first of all, basically we solved all of the world's problems in that 12 minutes.
Well done.
Yeah. No, but we said that perhaps the most important aspect of economic activities and behaviors was a twofold idea of making sure to be as local as possible in terms of our actions, and also establishing community whenever possible and working with people. Which, of course, regarding the second question, to bring in even people with divergent views and to see what compromise is possible, and to recognize that, as one of our group pointed out, Ashley pointed out, it's harder to establish compromise nowadays. People don't just have different views. When they're different, they're wrong. And that's in and of itself is a significant hurdle to get past. But when we can really, truly emphasize community and focus on local control and local investment and local connection, it really makes a huge difference. And essentially it allows us to become the example.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I hope I'm not compromising. So there was a lively conversation happening while you all were in your breakouts between our speakers, and there was something to the effect that you said, Jayati, of when we get a chance to get together in person and casually and find these ways of engaging as human beings, some of those barriers come down. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, Jayati. You were
Yeah, I think the discussion just now in the chat on community, and also really the thing on care, I couldn't agree more. It brings that home to me because I think a large part, at least I know this, but certainly in my own personal case in India. So I happen to be a non-believer. I'm an atheist, okay? And so much of Indian community life is organized around religion. And some of it is sort of exclusionary, but a lot of it is actually just, genuine people having their religious rituals, but they get together at those. And, so already in a sense, they can suss me out immediately as an imposter if I do any of that stuff, which I think is a real failing of the left. I mean, I really regret that I am an atheist. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about it because I am. But I do believe that you need these other forms of community, which allow a greater sense of trust, which then enables you to even bring across different arguments that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. There must be other ways of developing community. It's just that in India, religion is so all-pervasive. But there are many other ways. I've seen that in England, all those lovely choir practices that people do. I've seen that in lots of rural US, in the 5 colleges area of Massachusetts where I teach, that you can get communities around different things. So I think that's really important.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I thought I heard you say I was slightly distracted just because of what I'm doing, but I thought I heard you say something about, like being together with people whose views we don't necessarily identify with in person, in a conference setting. I think you said something, whereas like somebody you vociferously disagree with on paper or, from an academic standpoint, then you have a chance to have a meal with them or break bread or, get in the same space with them. It gives you a whole new perspective. I don't know. I'm seeing you nod vigorously, Amanda. Do you want to contribute, Amanda?
Well, I mean, this has been, so much of the aim of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is like to build the movement, like the power base that is necessary to transform the economic system by connecting a wide range of different actors and trying to foster this collaboration. So this is always a very real question. And I will say from my experience, so like in the US, for example, what I did was it's really tough, and even globally, right? Like we're a brilliant but quite ideological group of folks that have a hard time sometimes connecting across different theories or like theories of change, like tactics, philosophies. And so in the US, what I did was brought together 7 different state level coalitions that were all organizing under different banners, like some solidarity economy, some just transition, some indigenous economy, some well-being economy, et cetera, but really to focus in the sort of good, bad, and ugly of multi-stakeholder coalition building in the US, like what's working, what's not. And we started it out with, to your point, Carrie, just a dinner of everybody going around and, answering questions around, like in another life, what kind of work they would do, or, when was the last time they felt that feeling of just like delight, like what was that sort of like joy and feeling, and to sort of connect in that whole person level before getting into any discussions around their sort of work or strategies. And the other thing that I've really found huge in these spaces is I've realized that like trust is not something that you earn, it's something you give. And so therefore modeling a lot of vulnerability in terms of being really honest about your own challenges, failures, or like questions is quite powerful for then providing people the permission to do so as well in those spaces. And so those are things that I've sort of found are working, but it's really tough. I don't know. And we're already theoretically very aligned, right? And so we're talking about people who are very different in terms of their maybe political or economic persuasions. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, on a slightly side note, and perhaps somewhat, you know, yeah, like a collapse tinged, it seems that the natural disasters tend to bring out the best in us. We tend to form connection and community in those moments when we're desperate and when we really need each other, and people aren't asking us what our label is. They're just helping. The helpers come out. And so, I mean, in a strange cosmic way, I think to some extent, I feel like I wonder if that's the lesson, the ultimate lesson that climate change is teaching us, is that we need each other. We are effectively, ultimately, all human beings that connect on way more, many more levels than we don't, and we're gonna get taught again. We're going to learn again how to support each other and connect each other and humanize each other in our eyes. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. So any other reflections on those particular prompts that anyone would like to share out loud? I'm not going to try to track them so much in the chat as we're just recording them there, but if anyone would like to articulate that, their discussion harvest for further reflection by Jayati and Amanda, that would be great. Please raise your hand. We're losing a couple
I
of
have to
people.
say that workplace issue was really quite interesting.
Oh yeah, okay. Who brought that one in?
Have they left already, maybe?
Possible. We've lost a couple of people.
Yeah, yeah.
Why don't you expound? Did you hear me?
To whom?
Oh, either of you. But you said you were interested, so I'd love to hear
I was
why.
interested, yes, because I mean, academic workplaces are shall we say, the cesspits of and so it's interesting because at one level they can be solidarity, um, especially if there's a bigger threat like there is now, let's say in US universities and so on. But it's also, workplaces can also be places of intense conflict over nothing. Lots of ego, lots of all of these. So it's interesting to think of workplaces building solidarity, because academic workplaces don't build solidarity. That's unfortunately the way academics has been constructed. It's become very neoliberal. It's become very individualist. And so you make a few friends, you make a few colleagues whom you trust, but you don't trust, let's say, the entire department. And in fact, often there are cliques and there are, I mean, all kinds of nasty stuff. And there was this famous state, I forget who said it, but that academic battles are so bitter and violent because the stakes are so low. And so it's, I mean, I imagine it's different on a factory floor. I imagine it's different, let's say, in a hospital, where, you are really having to work with each other and rely on each other and all that.
I love
I've-
that. That's so interesting. I think Amanda probably has something she wants to share about that, but I just want to, I mean, something I'll posit is like, I wonder how much of that is due to incentive alignment.
Hmm. Uh,
Becky,
let's see a hand up. Becky,
did you have
yes.
something
Yeah.
you wanted to
I
share?
wanted to comment on that. My career was in the federal
Hello?
workforce, and my experience was
Hello,
that,
hello, hello.
are you not hearing me?
Oh,
We're hearing
hear
you.
you.
We can hear you. Yes. Yeah.
I in the federal workforce, and my experience was that it was important to stay apolitical and just work towards the mission. And I found that there was a whole lot of unity. We often didn't know what each other's political views were unless we had, personal connections for some reason. Um, and I'm really, really worried now that the politicization of the federal workforce is going to break that, or has broken it, maybe past tense. And that is deeply frightening to me, because I think that was one of the powerful things, was the culture of mission first and really focus on doing the work for the people that we were there to serve.
What kind of area did you like? What kind of policy did you work on, Becky? Just out of curiosity.
I was in defense intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to throw in here, just ask more of a question is because you did mention also during the conversation that you see more and more women coming to the forefront with different perspectives. Who are a couple of people that each of you are following? You think this person really has great ideas, someone to look out for? If you could recommend us some names, I'd be very curious to hear.
Oh, there's so many I can think of. As economists, my senior colleague, Nancy Folbray, she's a fantastic, I would say one of the first feminist economists. She, one of her early books was Who Pays for the Kids? Which you can guess already the answer, right? But she has a really recent book called The Rise and Decline of Patriarchal Systems. So you see the very hopeful title, Decline, but which is also excellent. I have a younger colleague, Isabella Weber. She's a German young economist who's made a lot of waves with her book. She has an excellent book on why China escaped shock therapy. But recently she's been working on price controls. She got attacked for an article in The Guardian. I mean, like really badly trolled by some of the top economists in the field, which again tells you about the discipline, right? Everybody from Paul Krugman down, they were all just on her and in the most appalling way. She was really shaken in her early 30s, right? So quite a young researcher in that sense. And to the point where somebody in, I think it was MIT, set a question paper saying, with Isabella's point about price controls being one way of coping with the Ukraine war related inflation, saying, what would a real economist say in answer to that? So she got a lot of flack, but I'm happy to say survived all that, and she's going great guns. She's doing really well, and in a way, all that terrible publicity was good for her because it made people read her work and realize that the work was good. So yeah, two people I can think of just from my department right now. The many, many more I can think of. They're actually wonderful role models. There are many, many more of them. So it's great that way.
Yeah, thank you. Just before we just head over to Joseph, I just wanted to ask Amanda if you also have anyone you might point out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Jayati for sure. But yeah, some women who have been really inspiring to me, I think, in this particular moment. One is Vanessa Machado, who wrote Hospicing Modernity. I think she brings like a really interesting indigenous lens to sort of like the poly crisis and like a deeper level of sort of systems transformation and reckoning. Naomi Klein, always like I really
Mhm.
appreciated her recent article in The Guardian. I think I was falling into a pretty apocalyptic sort of state, and this whole vision of like that's what's animating this is everybody just believing we don't have, yeah, we're all gonna die, so there's no point. So we need to create the coalition in service of life. And another book, which I think, and just thinker who, again, at that sort of intersection of Marjorie Kelly, her background is in journalism, but she wrote that book, Wealth Supremacy, which I think came out last year. But especially, I feel like the financial system is at the heart of so much of this. And she did a really good job demystifying that and articulating it in ways that people could really resonate with and understand the importance. Because even within our economic systems change movement, a lot of times people just don't touch finance because it's, yeah, several degrees removed from reality. So explaining it in ways that are both transformative and yeah, intuitive to people or make sense, I think is a pretty impressive feat. So those are the first that came to my mind. Mhm.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, Joseph, over to you.
I was just going to say, while these folks were speaking, I was reminded of a book called The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Barr, which is an absolutely brilliant crushing of the idea that the Bible says that women are second-class citizens and really demonstrates where it comes from, that it's cultural, that it's Aristotle, that it's a lot of things, but it's not actually in the Bible. So, because that's an argument that you're hearing more and more nowadays, that the patriarchy is biblically based and ordained by God. But it turns out it's D, none of the above. And yeah, it's I think that's a huge part of it. And the other thing is, I think we have this opportunity to share with people that there are options out there, right? I mean, look at the size of this group, right? I mean, yeah, it's swell that there's folks here, but there should be 250 people listening to this series, not 25, not 10, not 5. And it's just really being the example. And I just want to say that Becky Reese, when she described in detail in the chat what we talked about, is the most competent writer of summarizer of things that we were discussing I've ever seen, and she can do that anytime she wants in my world. Thank you for that, Becky. I just had to say how much I appreciated her brilliant summarization of what we were talking about. I'll be quiet now.
Thank you, Joseph, for those shares. That's terrific. And thank you, Becky. I'm back. I got dropped off there for a second. I'm going to let's see. Does anyone have another reflection they'd like to share, maybe from a voice or two that we haven't heard from yet, or a question for our guest speakers? And if not, I'll use host's prerogative. Let's see. I'm not seeing. Uh-oh, I hope I didn't freeze again. Shoot.
You're not frozen.
Video is frozen, but we can still hear you. Well, no longer. Well, Gary will drop back. The invitation is still there for anyone that might have a question or a reflection that we haven't heard yet.
If we're all right, will you mind terribly if I leave? Because it's nearly midnight in Delhi, so it would be nice to close the evening for me.
No, please, yeah, please go rest. Thank you so much
Oh,
for.
and you said no, I thought you said please stay. Okay.
Sorry?
Now, when you said no, I thought you said, oh, no, please stay. But
Oh no, I was going to say if you are, yeah, if you thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate the incredible perspectives that you brought. But yeah, feel free to drop off if you're getting a bit tired. Yeah, it's
Okay.
very late. Thank you so much for joining us at a late time. Few of us we could still hang back for a little bit if people still want to
yeah,
talk.
sure. Lovely to talk to all of you, and
Oh,
especially Amanda. Thank you.
so nice to talk with
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
Jayati.
yeah.
Sleep well, and I hope to see you again soon.
Yes.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, and for those that are staying, I'm actually curious to hear. And yeah, for the question that Amanda brought, where people discussed around what are the positive, what are the economic activities that have you see positively contributing? Yeah, is there anything aside from community that came up for people? Or even why you, Amanda, why you wanted to bring this question forth?
Oh, yeah. So the motivation for this is because I sort of, I exist within this sort of like post-growth, degrowth, beyond GDP kind of movement. And so we talk a lot about economic growth or it as being bad or whatever, being good, but we don't often then get into the weeds of being clear on, but what aspects of the economy do we actually want to grow and which ones do we want to decline? And so I'm just using any time I'm given the option to engage smart people like yourselves to hear what you think are the dimensions of the economy, our existing economy, because I think that's also important for people to realize it's possible, right? Like that there are aspects of this already given system that we see, this better world already within. And it's just more about like strategic protection and promotion of those dimensions relative to the destructive ones. So I'm trying to work when I find some time on like a new kind of like industrial policy taxonomy, which is related to this. Like, what are the dimensions of the economy you'd be interested in assessing in terms of its social and ecological impact beyond just sectors or goods and services, like production processes, ownership structures, like these sort of things. So I appreciate your input here, and I'll percolate on it.
Well, sorry to be so disruptive because I keep getting dropped, but and we can certainly conclude early if nobody has any other questions for Amanda. Um, I I know that we let Jayati go, but I was recalling in our preparation call how she surfaced her her frustration, anger, even let's call it rage. And so I'm wondering, I don't want to speak for her, but I'm wondering for you, Amanda, how do you manage your emotions in this work? And given how sometimes subtle um, the implications of the work are and how long they can take, and how sometimes even invisible they are in certain ways, right? Like the work is being done, the intention is there. Sometimes we don't see the results of that work, but and clearly you face so many barriers everywhere you look to your voice getting heard. So like how do you manage and work with your emotions around, those obstacles that you run into?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And it was actually something I sat with quite a bit. I took a sabbatical last summer. Like, it took 3 months just like unpaid off because I was feeling like I needed some space and time. Because it can be tiring, and frustrating. And what I realized was, for me, at least personally, yes, obviously I care about this work because I think that this is really important for transforming the world or building a better world. But I think I just sort of like nerdily enjoy it. Yeah, I have like a high level of intrinsic enjoyment around getting to talk about these things, exploring these things, thinking about these things. And so for me, I do hold a philosophy that if it's not fun, it's not sustainable. And so really just trying to, I think one of the big things for me coming out of the sabbatical in particular, which is actually kind of counter to a lot of what we've been discussing around how to build coalitions or collaborate with people you don't agree with, was to be a lot more selective about who I work with over what I'm working on, right? Like to just sort of like follow energetic vibes and connections with people who it just feels easier and more fun. that way, as opposed to like, even if it's like, oh, that person is doing this really important work that's very strategic, but just like really tough personality like dynamics, that was a source, I think, of a lot of my yeah, emotional sort of like draining. Yeah. So I don't know if this is good advice or not, actually, but this is what I've been doing. Hmm.
There's Becky. Go ahead.
I'm 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 trying to think of a good question and not coming up with anything, but one thing I wanted to comment on is that there are some very, very old books in the systems world, the Limits to Growth and the 30-year update of that on the climate issues, and No Limits to Learning, which was a follow-on sort of thing. And I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of potential in focusing on learning and shifting viewpoints. And I also feel like there's so much momentum in the wealth-driven economies of the West that, of course, it's really hard to fight against that. And of course, you should want to align with people who are unified in your viewpoint to go against it. And I applaud that and think without becoming dismissive of the rest, that is a really healthy approach, I think. So go, Amanda.
Thanks, Becky. I appreciate you. Validate my life choices. Yeah.
Any other questions or reflections for Amanda? Okay, well, I want to say thank you all for participating today and for all the rich reflections that were shared in the chat. You will be receiving a copy of those, and they will be handily reviewed by all of us, and I'm sure relished. And I want to express huge gratitude to Amanda and Jayati, who I hope is resting well or fast asleep at this point, and for this wonderful conversation. And as we always know, there could be so many threads that we could have pulled in what was said today, and we love hearing these conversations. And also, there are so many questions that get left unpacked. So perhaps we'll have an opportunity to unpack some of them together in the future. And thank you all for your patience with me and my mobility and technology challenges. And it's wonderful to see you all. And thank you to my dear colleagues, Carolina and Audinette, for supporting me. And in particular, when I wasn't here. And yeah, just grateful to all of you for participating and for this wonderful conversation. And you will be hearing from us about the next dialogue, which we haven't announced yet, but which will be happening as the third in the 4 series dialogues for 2025. So we invite you to be on the lookout for that. And we also invite you to review the many rich conversations that we've already had with amazing women in the field of systems thinking, including Ashley Hodson, who is on this call. And so, any questions or comments before we conclude for today?
I will just second thank you to everyone, and also I will second Becky's sentiment here in the chat. Thank you, Alternate, for taking all these notes and for finding the links so quickly. That was pretty incredible. Yeah, appreciating you, Carrie, also for navigating everything while caring for your mother.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you again so much, Amanda. And we are grateful for everyone's participation today. And we'll see you hopefully in the next dialogue. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, everyone.
everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.